Hey y'all, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to check out another one of my videos. And in today's video, I'm excited to be going back to the Menagerie Sugar High palette, and we're going to be diving in and doing a bunch of looks with this palette. And if you missed my previous video on this, I will leave it linked up here. I swatched the palette out, I did an eye look, and I also did some comparisons if you are curious to see how it compares to previous palettes from Menagerie. But in today's video, I'm really going to focus, as I said, on just sharing with you guys all the looks, or almost all the looks, not all of them. I think I did one or two off camera, but all the looks that I've recorded to share with you guys, and just to give you guys more inspiration if you picked up this palette or if you were really curious about the color story and wondering what type of looks you could get. I'm going to share with you guys all the different type of looks that I was able to get with the Sugar High palette, which looks like this if you are not familiar. It was a very intriguing palette. I'm going to save my thoughts to the end of the video just to keep this video very focused in the beginning on just giving you guys the tutorials. If you're new around here, when it comes to my tutorials, I always like to share with you guys that I don't just do a voiceover talking about what I'm using or just do music. I'm going to be speaking about the specific shadows that I'm using as I go along with the tutorials. So if you're someone who's very curious about how each of the individual shadows blend together, how they blend with different shadows, how the shimmers work together and whatnot, that is going to be during the tutorials. So that's information you'll have as we go along. So with that said, let's go ahead and I'm going to give it over to voiceover Katie, and we're going to dive into this palette and create a bunch of fun looks with it. Alright, we're going to dive into the first look, and I'm just putting on some eyeshadow primer. This is from Anastasia Beverly Hills, and then we're going to get right into that first shade there, that gorgeous purple yogurt drop, and I am applying this on the inner portion of my eyes. And this shade is a very pastelish type of purple, but it does have a nice amount of pigment to it. It's not super like pigmented, opaque, and like thick of a shadow, but it goes on very nicely. You can definitely see pigmentation is there. And then once I was happy with that, I went on to the blue shade, and that one is also nicely pigmented. I really enjoyed this shade. The Sweet Varieties has a nice amount of intense bright blue pigment, but it still looks very pastelish, and this blends into the purple so seamlessly. Both of them have that type of easy formula to work with, nothing too intense, nothing too thick when it comes to a matte, and they both blended together well, and they both blended onto the eyelid very nicely. Then I'm putting down some glitter primer. This is from NBA Cosmetics, just to help the shimmers stay in place on my eyelids all day. And then I'm going to go into the first shimmer shade that I'm using, which is Falling with Style. And this is a really dark type of shimmer, so I wanted to put on the outer corner to add some depth. And this one has a lot of pigmentation to it, as you can see. This is a shade that if you put it all over the lid, depending on how it catches the light, it will be brighter or darker depending on it. So I do like that about this shade. And then once that was down, I went in with that pink sugar cube, and I'm putting it on the inner half and applying it. This one is a little bit sheerer than the one I just used, but it's still, if you take the time to pack it on, it does get more intense and more noticeable and more pigmented as you apply it. So I was happy with the amount that I was able to get. And then for the center shade, I'm taking that Sugary Sweet, and oh my goodness, this is such a hot pinky purple type of shade. It is so beautiful, 10 times more beautiful in person, just trust me. It has a nice amount of pigment to it. It's not too dark. It's a very light and bright shade, so I really enjoyed playing with this shade, and it's probably one of my favorite shimmer shades in the palette. It's very easy to pick up, very easy to go on. It has a nice, like I said, nicely pigmented, not flaky or anything or crumbly at all. So overall, just a really nice solid shimmer. And then once I've gone back and forth and just blended all three of those shimmers together, I'm going to take a pause and go ahead and finish my face. And then when we come back, I'm taking that really dark shimmer shade, Falling with Style, and putting it right against my lash line to give me some depth. I was really happy to see that this worked very well. I mean, it is a shimmer on my lower lash line, but it still deepened my lower lash line, which is what I was going for. And then once that was down, I just took that purple and I'm blending this on my lower lash line just to give a little bit of lightness and nothing, too stark of a contrast, just to soften out the shade overall. And then for my inner corner highlight, I'm taking this highlighter from Menagerie Cosmetics and popping it on my inner corner highlight, since there wasn't a lighter shade left in the palette to use once I got to this step. But that is the first look, and as you can see, I think the look looks very effortless, very well blended. It was very easy to do as well, like blending all the shimmers together. They're very easy to blend together. Blending the mattes was very effortless and nice as well. I really did enjoy working with all the different shades and the textures in this palette. There are definitely, with the shimmers, a few different textures, with the light pink that I used in the inner half being a little bit more crumbly, not terribly so, but just a little bit more crumbly and not as pigmented as the hot pink and the blue, but overall really nice. And this makeup look wore really well. Next up, I forgot to show the eyeshadow primer that I used, but just jumping right into the makeup look, I am starting with that Furry Friends and packing it on the outer corner. And as you can see, this shade actually shows up a lot more red than I initially thought when I was starting out using it. So it really goes on nicely. Nice amount of pigmentation. Again, a little bit softer overall with the pigmentation, but still a nice shade. Not saying it's not pigmented, it's just a little bit more soft than I've experienced from Menagerie in the past. And then moving on to the orange slice, I'm putting this in my inner corner. This again, nice pigmentation. It's very easy to apply. As you can see, like it goes on, working it into the look really easily. It blends out nicely. It has a very effortless blend to it. So a very easy type of eyeshadow to work with. And then taking a touch of that Snugglebug, I am putting that just above that shade I put on the outer corner to help soften and blend it out. And this shade, again, I mean, I'm not using a ton of it here, but it is a very nice shade. It gave me the look I was wanting. I wanted to diffuse that darker shade out a little bit so it wasn't too stark. And this worked really well to make it a very effortless, kind of seamless blend out to my skin and just help with the transition there. For the shimmer, I'm going into Pouch Protective, that orange. Oh my goodness, this shade is beautiful. It's very smooth to pick up, very easy to pick up, easy to apply on the lid, and very, very nicely pigmented. There's nothing sheer about this shade. It goes on very smooth, nothing too textured at all. Overall, this was a shade I really did like, and just such a gorgeous shade. And then for the inner corner, to really make it pop, I'm going in with that green Nom Nom and putting this on. This one's a little bit of a looser type of shimmer compared to the orange, but still has a lot of pigment to it. Very easy to pick up, goes on very nicely, and the two shimmers blended to each other very, very well. And this was another shade that was a favorite of mine, as I was saying. Very nice and very intensely pigmented to work with. Once my face was finished, I went back to my lower lash line and just taking that darker shade Furry Friends and blending out my lower lash line. Blended no problem. And then taking the matte orange and using it to diffuse out that shade just to make sure it's all real nice and soft. Didn't use a ton of it here, but both shades worked just fine on my lower lash line. And then for the inner corner highlight, I'm using Sugar Cube and packing that on. This shade works really beautifully as an inner corner highlight. It's so very bright and beautiful. When I pick it up, I kind of make sure I press it down really hard so that it doesn't fall all over my face. Once you kind of press it on your lid, it shows up very nicely and just is a gorgeous inner corner highlight. And yeah, that's going to be the finished look. I really like this color combo. It was a lot of fun to wear, a lot of fun to see how the reds and oranges and greens all work together. And overall, I had absolutely no complaints with any of the shades I worked with to create this look, and wear time was fantastic. Had no issues, didn't see anything breaking down throughout the day. Very, very happy overall. All right, the next time I remembered to show you guys my eyeshadow primer. This is the Gerard Cosmetics Clean Canvas Eye Base, and then I'm jumping right into that purple and putting this now on the outer corner, and I'm starting in my crease here just to put it down and get the work started. And as you can see, that was one dip in, and it showed up really nicely as a very soft pastel type of color, but I picked up more again, and now it's showing up a little bit more intense and vibrant. So I like the versatility of that and that you can build up the intensity of this shade. Then taking the blue, I know this is a bit repetitive, but I'm putting it on the inner corner this time in the inner half of the crease there, and I'm applying it with a very small little brush, and it's going on nice and intense and pigmented. I really wanted this one to have a lot of intensity in the inner corner compared to the first look that I used it on the outer corner. And then I'm also just spending some time to mesh and blend the two together and make sure that you can see the blue that gives depth to the purple, but you know, at least the purple still stands on its own. So back and forth with this a bit. I was very happy working with these and happy with the results that I got once the blend was done. Using a little bit of NYX glitter primer just to prep it. I always find that something super tacky just helps the shimmers stay well throughout the day. Not that it needs it, but I just feel like it doesn't travel up into my crease area as much. And then I'm going in with that Sugary Sweet and applying this on the outer half this time, kind of using it on my outer edge this time and just placing it right down there. And as you can see, it's a really pretty shade. Two dips in, and I have plenty to cover that outer portion of my eyelid. I really do like it, and overall, yeah, it's a very nice shade that's easy to use and very nicely pigmented. For the rest of the lid, I'm taking Sugar Cube and applying it on, and as you can see, while it isn't as intensely pigmented in like the color and the depth of the color in the shade, it does show up as a very like almost blinding white, or just depending on what you put it against, you know, the colors, it'll kind of reflect differently. So with it being close to the blue, I feel like it looked more icy white, which I thought was a nice aspect of it, and it's easy to work with. Like I said, a little bit more crumbly than like the hot pink, but still a beautiful, gorgeous shade that works really well. I decided to take that shade Furry Friends again, putting on my lower lash line, nothing too exciting there, and then just taking a touch of the yogurt drop to blend and buff it out and just bring everything, make sure everything matches and is nice and diffused. And then for my inner corner, to give it a pop of something different, I decided to take that green shimmer in the palette, Nom Nom, and applying it there. And it is such a fun pop of green. I really like that I went this route. It's a very easy shade to apply in the inner corner, and it's still very nice and light. I loved pairing with this very purpley, pinky type of look. And that's going to be the final look. Overall, I really enjoyed this look. This was fun. That green just takes it up one more notch for me. It's just being fun, unique, and different. And overall, working with these shades, I was happy with all of the ones that I worked with and used in this look. All right, next step, just putting on some ABH eyeshadow primer, and then I am jumping right into that Furry Friend shade and packing this into the outer corner. And I wanted to try something different and see if I could get more depth with this eye look. So I'm taking the blue and popping it right on top of it, and then I'm going to take more of that Furry Friends and pop it down on top. I just want to see how dark I could get it if I added some blue to this shade, and as you can see, it kind of turned a darker gray. Depth when it comes to the mattes is really missing in this palette for me, so I wanted to try to combine them. You're going to see a little bit of like catching there as I'm blending other shades on top of it, and I wish I would have just mixed the two colors kind of on my brush and then applied it to my eyes, as opposed to placing one shade and then topping it and doing a sandwich motion like that, because I feel like it got a little bit patchy. But overall, I did like the amount of depth I was able to get combining those two shades together. And then I'm just taking the orange right on top of that to diffuse it out and give it a nice and light and gradual diffusion out into my skin. This orange slice showed up really nicely, as you can see, and blends into the shades really well. It took a little bit of extra time, I think, because mixing Sweet Varieties and Furry Friends, as I was saying, was getting a little patchy, but just a little bit of extra blending. I was really happy with the diffusion and that transition I got between the two shades. Next, going into Joey, I'm going to put that on the inner half of the eyelid and just blend this in. This is the first time I've used this shade on camera, and I really like this shade as well. It's a very neutral shade, but it's not super like neutral, just like beigey. It's got a lot of mustardness to it, so I really like that shade. And then just placing down a little bit of glitter primer before diving into the shimmers here. And for the shimmers, I'm taking that orange once again and putting this on the inner half of it. This shade is so smooth, as I've said several times. Some of them are a little bit more chunky or crumbly, I guess, when you're touching it, but this shade is always just incredibly smooth to pick up with a brush, finger, whatever. It's a nice shadow to work with, and it just has a little bit of a shift to it in person. It's a gorgeous shade. And then for the rest of the lid, I'm going to be taking that red shade, which is Ruby, and putting this on the rest of the half and just spending some time to work it into the orange. This shade is also super pretty. The texture of this shade is very much like the orange in that it's very smooth. It's very easy to pick up on a finger or brush. It's very pigmented. It's not super textured, and it doesn't get flaky or anything when you're working with it. So another standout shade in the palette for me. For the lower lash line, I'm just taking a little bit of that red and blending it before taking a touch of that hot pink matte and diffusing it out just to make sure it's all nice and soft. And then for the inner corner, I'm once again taking Sugar Cube and putting that on my inner corner, and it really pops in this look. I was really happy with how intense of an inner corner highlight I got with this shade. And that's going to be the finished look. As you can see, like the finished look, I really like how it looked, but I feel like if I had taken those first two shades that I used and I had mixed them on my brush before placing them on my eyes, I would have been even happier. But overall, I am excited to see that combining those two, I was able to get more depth with this palette than you could just using one matte shade, I guess, is what I was kind of going for, because I was a little bummed to not have a really deep type of outer corner matte shade to work with in this palette. But overall, I really enjoyed the look. The shimmers are stunning. These two shimmers are my favorite formula because they're so smooth and so pigmented. But yeah, overall, a beautiful look that I really enjoyed wearing. Alright, last look, I'm using the Ace Beauté eyeshadow primer before diving right into that Joey shade and putting it on the inner portion again. I wanted to use it again since I didn't really highlight it too much in the previous looks, and just to get a little bit more familiar with this shade. As I was saying, it's kind of like a subdued type of mustard that's still a little bit light and almost like on the verge of pastelish, which I feel like is something all of her mattes have, that just hint of lightness or pastelish to them. They're not super intense or neonish. And so once that was down, I wanted to give it a little bit more intensity in the inner corner. So I'm taking that matte orange slice. I'm just putting on a really tiny brush just to give a little bit of depth right where I'm going to put the cut crease, just so it stands out. And like I said, has a little bit more depth than the shade Joey by itself can give. And this, I think, pops really nicely. And then I'm moving on to the blue, which I thought was a fun combination with the orange and more mustardy tones. But I'm putting the blue on the outer half and bringing it down and around to the outer edge. We've already used this several times. This is a shade that's super easy to work with. I'm very happy to work with, and I just laid it down really heavy this time because I wanted it to really stand out and pop as much as it's able to. And once that was down, I'm going to take that shimmer, the Falling with Style, and I'm packing it onto my outer corner. I decided to forgo any type of glitter primer just to show you guys what they look like without it. This shade goes on beautifully, sticks really nicely. It's very smooth, kind of like the orange and the red in the palette. It's just a hair more loose or a little bit more crumbly when you're picking it up with a brush. Then taking Sugar Cube, I'm going to put this right above or right into my cut crease, but I'm still leaving a little bit of empty space on the center of my lid. I'm just going to use this to, act as my cut crease and connect it into that blue that I put down. I've already used it in this form. I've already talked to you guys about how nice it is, and it's because I'm putting it next to the orange, I feel like it pops a little bit more with the pinkiness as opposed to the last look that I did when it popped a little bit more looking like an icy white. But here I feel like and against the orange it looks very pink. And then for the very center, I decided to use green again, Nom Nom, just because green is so beautiful. Gorgeous shade. This shade is also like very smooth like the orange and the red, but maybe a touch more loose. I mean, not super loose when you're picking up with a brush, just like when you're sticking your brush in, it can be a little bit crumbly, kind of like with that dark blue. But overall, a really nice shade, a really nice formula to work with. And then just finishing out my look, I'm putting the blue against my lower lash line just to give a little bit more depth. And then I'm going to the purple on the inner half of it and combine the two together. These two blend so beautifully together. And then for my inner corner highlight, once again, just taking that highlighter from Menagerie Cosmetics and using this to highlight my inner corner, and that is going to be the look. I really tried to do something unique here for the final look and something that I hadn't done before. Overall, I feel like this look is pretty unique with the combination of the green and orange and pink and blue and even a little bit of purple in there. And even though it is super unique, I do feel like it all flows really well together. So super happy with the way it turned out. All the shades, I thought, and all the mattes blended really nicely together. And wear time, as I've said with all the looks, was really nice. I had no complaints with the wear time of the shimmers or mattes. They held up really nicely on me. All right, and per usual, this was the final look. I just added a different lipstick, which is the Beauty Mark lip gloss from Give Me Glow. Really comfortable lip gloss. I really do enjoy this. And also I added lashes, which are the Salon Perfect Pre-Perm Push-Up Medium Curl Lashes, which I have one more in here. So here's what they look like, not on my eyes. But that is all that I added to the look after I did the close-ups and whatnot. So those are all the looks. As I always like to say, let me know which one was your favorite and how do you think I did trying to get as much, versatility out of this palette as I possibly could. I tried to really go for more color, more neutral, changing up the colors, mixing up the colors and whatnot. And overall, like I said, just try to give you as much versatility as I could get out of this palette. And with saying that, let's go ahead and just segue right into my review. I'm going to keep it short because I've given my thoughts already. They haven't changed too much in my first impressions, and I'll of course be reviewing this in a Paletteppalooza, but I do want to touch on it very briefly here at the end. This was a very intriguing and interesting type of color story. It really stumped me, especially when I sat down to do today's look with this last look. I was just like, what should I put together? I felt like one of my looks were very similar to another as well. Like a couple of them, I was like, oh, you got a little close there, Katie. Like the tones were very, very similar, because I think the thing for me is that there weren't as many mattes as I would have preferred in a palette like this. Like the shimmers, I think the versatility with the shimmers and all the different type of shimmers, I absolutely loved. But there's something about the selection of the mattes, which were these shades right here, that really limited or just made it a little bit tricky for me personally. And that's just, me personally. Maybe some people look at this and see so many different type of looks and combinations that they can do, but for me personally, I was a little stumped when it came to what to put in the crease, what to combine together and whatnot before I even got to the shimmers. I really had to sit there and think about like, okay, what am I going to do today that's different than what I did yesterday? So that's something where I feel like if there's just maybe one more row of mattes in this palette that kind of went along with the rest of the shimmers and the mattes and whatnot, kind of went along with the color story, I would have enjoyed this palette a little bit more. But because it was a little limited with the way you could play with the mattes, that's where I felt a little stumped every now and then. But with saying that, that's just stumped when it comes to the color story. This palette really stretched me, I guess you could say. And then moving to the formula, I will say I love the shimmers in this palette. This Sugar Cube is the only one that was a little like,
wasn't my favorite, but honestly it wasn't bad. Overall, all the shimmers I thought were very easy to work with. They're very beautiful on the eyes. They showed up so easily, and that is an uncommon thing for me to say when it comes to Menagerie. Their Serenity palette that they did in collaboration with Annette's Makeup Corner was the first palette I tried from Menagerie Cosmetics that I actually really loved the shimmers. So I don't know if they, took a card from that and are continuing to use that type of formula in their future palettes, but it does kind of remind me of the Annette Serenity palette, the formula in here, and I do like them. They're great. But speaking to the mattes, that's where I feel like there's a little bit of a difference here. Now, there is more of a pastel look with these shadows, especially up here. These two, I feel like they just lend themselves to be very pastel. And so as I was using these mattes, I felt like in general, they were a little bit softer than I feel like you would expect, or that I have experienced from previous Menagerie palettes. I feel like Menagerie palettes, kind of, if you talk about Menagerie, it's always like, oh yeah, those mattes, they're pigmented. They'll stain your fingers or your eyelids. That's how pigmented they are. Like the Whale Song palette, every time I touch that, it stains my hands, it'll stain my eyes. They're so intensely pigmented. And that is a complaint with some people, that they're a little too pigmented and therefore a little difficult to work with. So I don't know if Menagerie is trying to tweak their formula a little bit and make them a little bit more of not pigmented, but a little softer and easier to build up to pigment, if that makes sense, because that's definitely something I discovered with this. Across the board with the mattes, when it comes to the typical Menagerie matte formula that I'm used to, they all felt a little softer and thinner. Still nicely pigmented, still build up nicely, still show up nicely on the eyes and whatnot, but there is a bit more thinness and just, a more softness to the mattes than I'm used to seeing when it comes to Menagerie. But maybe that was the, kind of goal with this palette, because I mean, as I was saying, you can look at this palette and you see more pastelish with here and then more of just neutral down here. So maybe that was their goal, to make the mattes all a little bit more softer, but it was definitely a difference in the formula that I noticed from previous Menagerie palettes. So definitely something I wanted to throw out there and make sure that you're aware if you're going into this expecting the typical Menagerie formula from like Whale Song or the Feral palette or even the Serenity palette from Annette's Makeup Corners. Those mattes are just so pigmented and so intense. These are a little bit softer. So I haven't really decided if it's a bad thing in my book or a good thing. For me, I mean, it still works great. I still got, really pretty eye looks, but I like a lot of pigment, so I kind of miss all the intensity that I usually get when it comes to Menagerie palettes, but like I said, I'm still kind of deciding if that's a good thing or a bad thing for me, but I definitely wanted to share that information out there with you guys so you are aware of that. But yeah, that's basically overall my thoughts on this palette. I really enjoyed playing with it. Wear time was great, as you guys heard during the tutorial, and overall, it is a nice addition to my collection. Did it win out over my top favorites from the brand? No, just because I think the color story and then also the more softer tones with the mattes, but it's still a really nice addition to my collection that I really did enjoy, and it's definitely a color story that was a challenge to me, so I find that fun as well. But yeah, I think that is going to do it for my review. It's going to do it for my video. I hope you guys enjoyed seeing all the different looks that I got from the Sugar High palette. Let me know your thoughts down below. Did you end up picking this palette up? Are you at all curious to pick this palette up? If you have not, I'd love to hear if this video helps you either decide to get it or not, or if you have the palette, if it helped you, get some inspiration on different type of looks that you could use with the palette. And yeah, with all that said, that is going to do it for me. Thank you guys once again so very much for watching. I had a lot of requests to give you guys more looks from the Sugar High palette. I asked in the initial video where I did a first impressions, and a lot of y'all were saying like, yes, we want to see more looks, so hence why I'm putting this video out, and I hope it didn't disappoint, and I hope you guys enjoyed seeing the different looks that I got from this palette. But with all that said, that is going to do it for me. As always, I'm over on Instagram. I'm LadyKatie92 over there, and I post reels, up close eye pictures, all that sort of thing. And yeah, with that said, I'll see you guys very soon in my next video. Bye guys.